The movie begins by showing a man named Frank who owns an MVW car that has been modified, one of which is to start the car must use a combination of passwords. Every day he works as a delivery man and everything looks very normal until we are made aware that Frank is not making ordinary deliveries, but he is transporting a gang of robbers who have just left the bank. There are 4 robbers who are in a hurry, but Frank has not yet blamed the car engine. This is because the robbers did not keep their promise, because they said yesterday that there would only be 3 robbers who would be transported. Maybe this looks very simple, but Frank, in running its business, has 3 main rules. And one of them all must be according to the initial agreement. Although threatened to be killed, Frank was not at all afraid. She also increases the possibility of getting caught. 54 kills. That was the deal. 3 million, 200. And from here the chase ensues, and we can see that Frank has set up a route to outwit the police who will target him. It can also be seen that his driving skills are extraordinary. Take us to the drop point. And in the end, they managed to outwit all the police who were chasing them. When they arrived at the drop-off point, the robbers gave them more money because they suddenly wanted to drive further. But Frank refused because, according to his rules, everything must be according to the initial agreement. Here's the deal. Rule number 1. Get in the car. Long story short, Frank returns to his luxurious beachfront home. The first thing he does is clean his beloved car, and we can also see that he has several fake license plates that he keeps in the garage. After cleaning his favorite car, that afternoon on television, it was reported that the robber he had driven earlier had been caught on his way to another city. At the same time, suddenly the house bell rang, and it turned out that it was Inspector Tarconi who came. He came because Frank's car was the same type of car that the robber had used to escape. The difference was only in the license plate. But in answering all the questions, Frank the genius looked very calm and answered all the questions rationally. From this conversation, we are also told that Frank is a former member of the military. So you don't have time for a coffee. That night, Frank returns to meet one of the clients who wants to use his services. And from here we are told that Frank's rule number 2 is that he does not want to know the name of the recipient of the package, and he also never tells his name. True, no names. The next morning Frank received the package, which was planned to be carried 250 kilometers to another city. In the middle of the trip, one of his car tires was flat, and he intended to replace it with a spare tire. But from here, he accidentally realized that the package he was carrying turned out to be a human being. Along the way, he could not get rid of his curiosity, and in the end, he decided to check the package he was carrying, which turned out to contain a beautiful woman. Frank also gave her the opportunity to drink. But because of this good attitude, Frank also had to accept the consequences, which is not long he walked back. The woman did not stop breaking the trunk, which made him have to stop again in the middle of the road. Frank then tied the girl up with a rope and then gave her a minute to pee. But it turned out that he was being played. Frank was forced to go through the wilderness to get back to the girl. Fortunately, after a long search, he managed to get her. But when he returned to his car, it was surrounded by 2 policemen. In the end, the package managed to arrive at a large villa owned by a mafia leader named Street. And because it was quite late in the delivery of the package this time, Frank was suspected. All 3 never opened the package. Proves the deal. And when he was going home, Street again offered a new job for Frank to do, which Frank was asked to deliver a suitcase to the address in the direction of his return. Short story short, in the middle of the road, Frank stopped for lunch. He also took the time to buy a few drinks before returning to the car, but suddenly his favorite car was destroyed. Frank, of course, will not remain silent. He immediately returned to the street headquarters earlier for revenge. And it turns out that Frank's shooting and fighting skills are really able to flatten these mobsters. But unfortunately, the person he was after had already left there. As a result, Frank decided to steal one of the cars in the garage and then leave from there. And on the way, he was again shocked because the woman was secretly in the back trunk from the beginning. My homies will be rolling with me. Whether because of heartbreak or other reasons, Frank decided to save the girl and take her home. When he got home, Frank asked her what her name was, and she replied that her name was Lai. And according to her, Frank is now in big trouble for bringing her home. Too much nonsense, Frank decided to sleep and let Lai do whatever he wanted, including if he wanted to run away from there, though. But instead of running away, Lai unpacked Frank's old stuff and decided to stay there. On the other hand, we are shown Street visiting his member, who was hospitalized, and he is told that all this is the work of Frank. But instead of feeling sorry, Street kills his member to cover up all this mess before the police. Kill it, Lai. The next morning, Lai was suddenly very friendly to Frank. She served Frank from making him bread to getting him drinks. But when he went to the front door to get milk, suddenly, the inspector came back. And this time, Frank was really in serious trouble because his burnt license plate was found by the inspector. But Frank said he was also looking for his car, which was stolen 2 days ago by someone. And to cover up his lies, Lai added to Frank's lies and claimed to be his girlfriend, who met when Frank lost his car at the market. Not satisfied with all these excuses, the inspector even wanted to check what car he used to pick Frank up yesterday. The point is that the unsatisfied inspector again asked Frank and Lai to come to his office a little later in the afternoon to provide information regarding the car theft case. Not long after the inspector left, Frank's house was suddenly attacked by dozens of mobsters, ranging from bazookas to caliber weapons, through the walls of his house until it was destroyed. Don't stay here! Fortunately, he had designed the house to have an underwater escape. He had also stored oxygen cylinders in case of a situation like this, and the two of them dived into Frank's escape house. It's my own goddamn business. That afternoon, the two of them went to Inspector Tarconi's office, and they were both bombarded with questions. Now it's not just about how Frank's car was stolen, but also about how his house was destroyed after he left it not long ago. And not to mention that no less than 5,000 bullets were found in his house. He also insisted on finding out exactly what Frank did after retiring from the military, including who the criminals were targeting him this time. But Frank still wouldn't open his mouth. Until finally, when Inspector Tarconi was called by his members for an affair, suddenly Lai nimbly opened the police system on the inspector's computer and immediately managed to find the identity of the mobster who had attacked Frank, namely the Street. At the same time, Inspector Tarconi suddenly returned to his room because he forgot something. At the end of the meeting, the inspector offered temporary lodging and a little money for Frank to use. Meanwhile, Lai himself suddenly invited Frank to the street using a taxi, but Frank did not agree because he thought he had enough of this whole mess. The mobsters thought they had finished them both off and let the mobsters feel victorious about it all, and for now, Lai should do the same. Finally, at the end of the conversation, Lai said that his father, his brother, and there were 400 other people from Hong Kong had been trapped in a container to be used as slaves, and it was all Street's doing. Actually, Frank was tired of the lies that Lai had often said, but this time it seemed that he was telling the truth and immediately made Frank melt. And finally, they went straight to Street's place that day. While Frank watched his enemy Lai go through the files there to find out the number of the container transport ship they were looking for, but he couldn't find it, which made Frank have to intervene. But suddenly a call from the secretary said that Lai's father came to visit, and from here Frank felt again fooled by Lai. Lai! Come on now. It turns out that Lai's father is a mafia leader who collaborates with the street. Lai then threatens his father to find out where he hid the 400 people in question. But because he did not have the courage to kill as a result, all his struggles went to waste. Frank was even in a tight spot at this time and was almost killed. Fortunately, the inspector was there on time. Frank! Frank woke up from his stupor, and once he saw his surroundings, he was surprised because now he was in a detention cell. This time, the inspector really wanted to know exactly what problems had befallen him, because if not, Frank would be detained for a long time. As a result, he also tried to tell the truth about the abduction of 400 people from Hong Kong that Lai had said. But to prove this, of course, requires a long process starting from the investigation and so on. Frank said that if it involved him, he could solve this case in less than 12 hours. But it was impossible for Inspector Tarconi to just let him out of the detention cell. Which until finally they cooperated so that there was no suspicion involving the inspector. That made me all weekend. Give me a hand. Frank arrives at a port and plans to use a small boat to get to the street's business location at another port. The inspector kindly gives Frank his small pistol, and he soon realizes that Frank is better armed. And that night, very carefully, Frank managed to arrive at the port in question. Using a stethoscope, he combed through the containers one by one. But the results did not find any clues because it turned out that the container had been transported to one of the trucks belonging to members of the street. Meanwhile, Lai was seen being held captive and received harsh treatment from his father for rebelling. As they were all about to leave, there was a gunshot that turned out to be from Frank. His current whereabouts had been captured by the Mafia, and the fight was inevitable. Frank initially managed to catch up with the truck he was so suspicious of, but the driver realized his existence and made him hit several roadblocks until finally he had to jump and land on one of the other vehicles. The mobsters who chased him were still not satisfied until finally this time Frank had to fight it out. It turns out that the enemies chasing him are more than he expected. He again has to fight with several other Mafia members. To make it difficult to be caught, Frank decided to spill used oil there, which then made it difficult for his enemies to move. But once again, the well-armed enemy troops appeared to attack, and he was forced to jump into the sea to save himself from the troops. Frank also tried to chase the series of trucks using the car he stole in the parking lot, but it turned out that the car engine was badly damaged due to forced irresponsible. Confused about chasing the enemy using a vehicle, especially suddenly above Frank flashed a small plane, commonly used by farmers to spray pesticides, and he immediately got the diamond idea to use it. I'm not a tourist. Sleeping. Frank also parachuted to land on one of the trucks. It didn't take long before he managed to take over the driver's seat and threw the driver into one of the ravines. Street from behind tried to shoot at the truck Frank was driving. And to make a long story short, he managed to catch up with Frank in the driver's seat, and their fight resumed. Luckily, Frank managed to hang on to the engine under the car, But in a moment, Ly's father immediately realized his presence and immediately shot at Frank using a machine gun. From there, this genius Frank finally took desperate action to finish off the street in the driving seat. Go! Frank is currently at gunpoint. While Ly is directed to be taken away, even his father does not hesitate to order his members to kill Ly if he makes reckless actions. Frank was then taken to the top of the cliff by Ly's father to be executed. Frank also said that Ly would never follow in his father's footsteps. And soon there was a gunshot which turned out to be Ly deciding to shoot his father. Inspector Tarconi arrives just in time. The innocent people held in the truck are freed, and with a great ending, the movie is over. Okay friends, for the movie, The Transporter still has 2 more sequels, so see you again in the next videos. Thank you.